Very much, Brian. It's going to be very hard to compete with Dumbledore. I don't have a magic wand today, I'm afraid. But no, fellow panelists and guests, it's a pleasure for me to be here today to introduce this seminar or session on sustainability in accounting and finance and the roles of higher education. I'd like to thank Christine and TUD for organising the seminar. It's given me a chance to come back. As I say, as Brian said, I come from just up the road. I've lived away for quite some years, so I haven't been in this campus for a long, long time, and it bears no resemblance to what I remember. So it was a nice surprise this morning to walk through it and see what a great and impressive place it will be, I think, going forward. So I suppose we're here to talk about sustainability. It's a term that we use more and more today, you know, in today's society and in various contexts, I would say. And I suppose it's fair to say that the concept of sustainability for many people is centered around what they value or what's important to them. But I think from the introduction that Brian gave, and I think the contributions from the different panelists, we see that it's a very vast topic. You know, it's a huge area that needs to be covered, and it's also one that's in the early stages of development. So I think we're on a path. Let's say we're at the very start, I would say, and it's going to be a long road till we get to where probably, you know, where we can give some sort of reasonable assurance, let's say, in terms of compliance with sustainability standards. But I suppose ultimately, you know, sustainability is part of our daily actions. Simple things. I mean, I was thinking out there, we were having a coffee. I mean, it's organic milk, it's oat milk, you know. Is it fair trade beans? I mean, is it, you know, are we using disposable cups, or are we doing the ones you bring back all the time? So every day we're making decisions which are impacting sustainability. So as I say, I'm not here to debate our coffee preferences or to define the concept of sustainability, but I think it's important to highlight that the choices that we make every day have an impact on sustainability. And I suppose as society and us, as we make more sustainable choices, this has an impact on the decision-making process of companies. I mean, it has serious impacts on investment portfolios, balance sheets, and on annual reports. So I suppose this brings us to the role of accounting and finance then, of our profession, let's say, with regard to sustainability. So the description I've given so far is simplistic and rudimentary, I would say, but I think it illustrates already the interrelationship between economic, environmental and social factors. And I think we're very lucky here today to have such a diverse and expert panel of speakers, because I think we have people from, like myself and Deirdre, from the public sector, and then we have people from the private sector, and we also have some people who are directly involved in the actual EAF4G. So I think it's a good, you know, broad base on which we can contribute, let's say. So, but before all the other panelists give you their perspective, I think I'd like to just share my experience, let's say, so far. I mean, I'm representing the European Court of Auditors here today. So I suppose our main perspective is from the EU standpoint, or more specifically the EU budget and how it's basically spent. So just for maybe some people don't know who we are, we're one of 7 institutions in the EU. Obviously, the different institutions have different functions, whether they be political, the EU Council, which is legislative, the EU Parliament, the Judiciary, the European Court of Justice, as well as the European Commission, whose role is to propose and enforce legislation, as well as implementing policies through the EU budget. So to put it into perspective, I suppose, the 2021-27 budget of the EU, including the NGEU recovery instrument, amounts to €2 trillion in current prices. So our role as the independent external auditor is to audit the budget, and in the first instance to check that the money is spent in compliance with the rules, whether it's legal and regular. And then obviously we look at performance aspects through the economy, effectiveness and efficiency of EU action. So we actually audit this through what we call our special reports. So in the context of both our financial and our special performance reports, the Commission is our main auditee. And it's the Commission that's actually the main, you know, it's responsible for the implementation of all these directives. It actually proposes them and it implements them. Maybe they're not fully applicable to them yet, which is a nice position for them to be in, I suppose. But we're talking here about the non-financial reporting directive, and then more recently the one that was referred to, the corporate sustainability reporting directive. And I think more here will probably you have a very good insight in terms of what the progress that's been made so far with the standards through, as I say, our involvement in the EFRAG group. So I suppose while the bodies that we currently audit, I mean, most of them were in the public domain, so they don't really fall under the directive in the first instance. In a way, as I say, it's a nice position. We propose it, and then we're exempt ourselves. So it's a very nice position to be in. But it doesn't mean that we don't focus on sustainability reporting, I would say. But our main work on sustainability is, as I said, through these special and performance reports. So as an example, our 2023 audit programme includes a strategic priority area, which is climate change, the environment and natural resources. So here we're going to carry out 21 performance audits covering a wide array of topics. So energy security, pollution, climate-related actions and sustainable food production. So I would say overall, sustainably related issues, let's say, is the focus for over 50% of our planned audits. So we're not looking in terms of the reporting, but we're looking at how the EU is basically encouraging these policies to be implemented across the member states, and obviously ultimately that will have an impact on how they subsequently report. But we're looking at it, I would say, on the ground in terms of what's actually happening with the money that the EU is investing. So I suppose one of the main concerns we have so far, and I will probably be replicated by others, is about the reliability and accuracy of the information which will be disclosed. I think that's the big Pandora's box, I suppose. I mean, and this is something we have seen specifically in relation to climate spending in the EU budget, which has been reported by the Commission. So, for instance, in 2022, we had a special report on the climate spending for the 2014-20 budget, which was approximately €1 trillion, the budget. So of this, the EU committed to spend 20%, at least 20% on climate action. So they reported that they had just about met the target. They spent €216 billion. But when we actually audited, we found that the actions which they claimed were actually climate related weren't, in our view, always relevant to climate action. And basically the climate action reporting was overstated. I think it was by about €72 billion. So, I mean, already there you can see that we have problems in terms of what's been, communicated as spent on climate spending compared to what we consider was actually spent. Again, another issue was that it was generally the tracking, let's say, or the reporting on climate was generally unreliable. The tracking method used was mainly based on assumptions, and there was no system in place for monitoring climate results. Now, I know this is not an easy area. It's not that easy to measure these things because there are an awful lot of interrelated factors which contribute to this. I mean, we're looking at it from the perspective of how the EU's money has contributed to any, whether it's reducing emissions or energy efficiency in homes or wherever it might be. So, as I say, in some cases it was deemed incorrectly to be climate relevant, and in other cases negative effects weren't accounted for. So it was purely, there was associated negative effects which weren't taken into account. And as you know, one of the main aims of the Paris Agreement was to make finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. So in 2018, the Commission established a Sustainable Finance Action Plan, which included measures to redirect private finance towards sustainable investment, to manage financial risks linked to climate change, and improve sustainable corporate governance in the private sector. Again, here we had a report at the end of 2021 on sustainable finance. And here, basically what we were looking at was whether the Commission had taken the right action to redirect finance towards sustainable investments. And again, we concluded that more action is needed at the EU level to redirect private and public finance towards in this direction. So again, we specifically noted that the exposure of the private sector to sustainability risks and the impact of companies on the environment and society will remain unclear until the new EU disclosure requirements become fully applicable. And we also recommended that the Commission clarify the role of auditors and supervisors in verifying, respectively, sustainability reporting and disclosures by companies and disclosures of financial market participants. So I suppose in terms of sustainable finance, we cannot ignore how the EU landscape has evolved in recent times, particularly with the EU's response to the COVID pandemic. The Next Generation EU programme finances this post-pandemic recovery and the green and digital transformation of the European economy. So the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which basically is 90% of the total NGU budget, will be used to borrow funds for loans to member states, and for the first time, which is the first time in the EU's history, and also for grants. So it's a mixture of loans and grants, and there are specific requirements under this programme where member states have to achieve certain targets. So much of their plan has to be related to green spending, and so much has to be related to digitalisation. And again, the issue will be how reliable the information will be and how accurate the information will be, which will be reported by the member states. So to conclude, I suppose we in this particular aspect, we assess sustainability performance across the EU will undoubtedly, what we find are that these are not a surprise, I suppose. I mean, I think it would be a general consensus just from talking to people outside even that this is where everybody is really at the moment. I suppose that the quality and comparability of information related to sustainability, the transparency of such information, and also how it's monitored. So I suppose in terms of us as an institution, we also have commitments there, as well as our commitments as an auditor, let's say, through our audit work. So within our 21 to 25 strategy, our vision is to contribute to a more resilient and sustainable European Union. However, we recognise that we're one of the smaller EU institutions, so our contribution will be relative to our size. But nonetheless, I think it's a very important issue for us on our agenda. So we're the co-leader of a EuroSci project group. EuroSci, I mean, Deirdre will know, but for others, it's basically coming together of all the different Auditor General offices across Europe. So it's like a common, approach to different topics. So here they're looking at preparing for future risks and climate crisis, time for audit to take a long-term view. So there, there's a working group who are working on that, as well as we're also a member of Inspiring More Sustainability Luxembourg. So this is a network of companies and organisations in Luxembourg that have an engagement towards corporate social responsibility. We take part in the Eco Management and Audit Scheme, so the EMAS scheme, which, as you know, is a management tool for evaluating, reporting on and improving an organisation's environmental performance. So we achieved this certification in March 2017, and we have continued to successfully operate an environmental management system in line with the EMAS regulations since then. Also annually, we publish an environmental statement and an ECA carbon footprint report. In 2022, we issued our first sustainability report covering the year 2021, and we intend to do this annually going forward. So as I say, while our own approach to sustainability reporting is still developing, our ultimate aim is to report according to the EU's sustainability reporting standards in line with the CSRD whenever that comes to fruition. This first sustainability report was based on the Global Reporting Initiative standards and describes the efforts that we're making in order to become a sustainable institution. So I suppose to conclude, I mean, what does transition to sustainability mean for the accounting and finance professional, and why should we be expected to lead the transformation? Already when we read the literature, we see that this is has its own vocabulary. There's so many acronyms and so many directives. It's really a minefield to try and figure out exactly how they all interrelate and to get the complete picture. So I think it's going to be a challenge going forward, and I think that accountants or the accounting profession, I think we're kind of good at this because we've been trained to understand and think critically. So far we have been used as strategic advisors and controllers of data. So I think we're uniquely positioned to offer trusted, independent reporting and advice. And I think that this will diversify into sustainable reporting. But going back to the problem, I think ultimately the main challenge is to capture, measure, analyse and report sustainability information and data. And while this data can be non-linear and qualitative in nature, it has a financial relevance which we cannot ignore, and that such information is intrinsically linked to the wider digital transformation across organisations. So in terms of how accounting and financial professionals need to reposition their roles, they will need to have an understanding of the environmental, social and governance landscape, as well as a knowledge of the drivers and risks in these areas. I think we've already seen, I think Brian alluded to it, that the curriculum in different has already been amended to basically expand and include certain elements which companies are demanding that they need going forward. So I think the accountancy profession is also reacting and will react further in terms of specific, skills, upskilling, which will be needed in order to, as I say, eventually in the initial stages, maybe we will give limited assurance, and ultimately the hope will be that we will be able to give reasonable assurance. But I think it's also, again, Brian alluded to, I think this is a huge industry in itself. We can see that apart from the accountancy profession, there are going to be very, very many other new, positions created. We have sustainability officers. Susan is sustainability officer for the Chartered Accountants. We have sustainability officers in many companies. We have ESG analysis. We have chief sustainability officers, climate risk analysts. So we have a whole plethora of new functions related to to be able to achieve the information which will subsequently be reported, and then which we'll hopefully be able to check. So I'm really looking forward to the presentations of my fellow panelists. Maurice, Deirdre, Maura, Susan and Sean, because I think, as I say, we have a very EU-related perspective. And I think the private sector is at a different stage, because they will have commitments from 2024 on, which they have to abide to. What we're doing so far is on a voluntary basis, and probably will remain so for some time. So as I say, on that note, I would like to finish, and thanks you very much for your attention. Thanks.